Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Atlantis Rising Monstrosities from Elf Creek Games. Now, this is an expansion to Atlantis Rising, which for the most part I'm going to assume that you know about as we go through this, but I will give a very quick overview of Atlantis Rising, how it operates, before I talk about what Monstrosities adds, and my various thoughts on the additions to the game. Atlantis Rising is a game, it's a cooperative experience for 1 to, I think, 7 players if I'm not mistaken, and in which you're going to be trying to stop the island from flooding, or more specifically, trying to assemble all the various components you need. You're going to have a bunch of these various modules you're trying to build over here. You're trying to assemble all of those into this machine over here, build all of those before Atlantis floods. You're not really stopping Atlantis flooding. It is going to flood. You're just trying to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. To do that, it is a worker placement game. Each player is going to have their own little crew of workers, and you're going to be placing them on various parts of the island in order to gather various components. You see all these locations over here require different materials to build, and so you're going to gather those materials. Then you need to go ahead and place some of your workers onto this board over here in order to build those various elements before everything floods. That's the general core concept of the game. The game gives you a lot of things to think about from 3 basic resources. So you're going to have a resource over here, here, and over here. These 3 over here are going to be the basic resources. Over here, you can convert it to Atlantean steel or whatnot. Over here, you can gather various cards. This whole deck of cards, of artifacts, and various abilities are going to help you out as well. And over here, you can go ahead and go in order to go ahead and get more workers. Try to get more workers every single round. Generally, across the course of the game, though, when you go to a location, you are rolling dice to get the action that you want. So if you want more workers, you're going to go to this aisle over here, placing workers down, but you're ultimately rolling a dice and hoping to roll better than the numbers shown. And the tricky part is the likelihood of success is always higher the further away from the center you are, the closer you are to the sea. The only problem is you place your workers and then you resolve the sea flooding and seeing whether you actually are still there and able to resolve your workers or not. So you can push your luck trying to get those better results and better rolls. The downside of that is you are closer to the sea, and that means you are more likely to actually flood and not even be able to resolve your actions at all. That's the core concept. Worker placement, trying to balance a variety of things, having various tools at your disposal. You can have a bunch of characters you can play as they'll all give you your asymmetric abilities, and you're trying to work together to gather resources to build these modules, which, by the way, not just are things you have to build, but they'll give you either one-time benefits or more worker placement spots as well as you try to stay ahead of the curve. Now, Monstrosities adds a bunch of new things. We're going to talk about what it adds and then my opinions on all of those things. The most starting baseline of what it adds is going to be some degree of more of the same. Meaning you're going to have new characters. I believe 5 new characters, if I recall correctly, that are added to this pool of characters you have. So you have a ton of variety to the different types of characters you can bring and the different asymmetric abilities they all bring to the table, giving you different ways to play with the same challenge as you go through it. The game's also going to add more of these modules over here. You're going to have more of the cosmic gate components that are added to the game. And again, these are going to give you some more elements of ways to go ahead and have additional variety to experience and difficulty as well. The components you have for the gates are not just variety, but they are difficulty because of how much they cost. And so it's one of the difficulty scalings that the game does have. And so that gives you more of that as well. So far we just have a degree of more. You're also going to have some more cards, some more artifacts and more cards mixed into the experience. So if you want more card variety, more artifact variety, you're going to get that as well. And I think that's what we have as far as the more stuff. And a few small tweaks. They also add some extra workers for some of the colors. The original Atlantis Rising, if you wanted to play at lower player counts, you have to choose specific colors because of the way they gave you workers. They just kind of give you extra. That's a nice little quality of life change, not an actual gameplay change, but they made it so now you can play with any of the colors as your preferred go-to. That's as far as the more of the same of what the game adds. But the game adds new things as well. The first of which is going to be 3 different scenarios of the monsters you are facing off against. This is called Monstrosities for a reason, and you are facing off against a bunch of monsters in the game. There's going to be the Harpies scenario. I have to remember the scenarios we have. We have Medusa, we have Scylla and Charybdis over here, and the Harpies. I'm probably butchering some of those pronunciations, but let's start with Medusa. Medusa, or monsters in general, are going to activate as part of the phase where the water is overwhelming you and taking over the island. You're going to have the monsters activating in that phase as well. Medusa is going to be wandering around the board trying to turn various players, either the players themselves or alternatively the Atlantean villagers, into stone. And it's your job to rescue those villagers, or alternatively to rescue Medusa herself, to overcome her, to craft the relica, the mirror of Medusa or whatnot, to craft that component in order to turn her into stone herself and then become an ally instead of a player fighting against you in the game. And so you're trying to stop Medusa and hopefully turn her to your side. You don't necessarily need to do that to win, but otherwise she's just continuously hampering you the entire game as she tries to get in the way, offering another random threat as she wanders around the board trying to turn things into stone. The Harpies are going to operate similarly, although Harpies have their Harpies Lair over here. The Harpies are going to run around the board trying to steal your things in the game. And then you have a choice. You can try to get those things back, or alternatively you can try to fight and take down the Harpies. And so you have to devote precious time and attention to just getting your stuff back, alternatively fighting them and taking them down, which will eventually reduce that threat once and for all. And so again, do you ignore them? Do you fight them? Do you steal back? How do you approach that? That's going to be the threat that the Harpies provide. And then meanwhile, Scylla and Sharpness over here are going to offer a two-headed threat, one of which is going to be trying to eat your various Atlanteans, and the other is trying to more rapidly flood the islands, and you have to try to stay ahead of them and thwart them and take them down as you go through the experience. And so those are going to be the 3 different scenarios of monster variety that are added to the game. Past that, the game's also going to add a whole bunch of these characters over here, these allies in the game. You're going to have a bunch of ally boards, and the game's going to give you a bunch of ways to get your hands on these allies. And so they're going to be anything from the scenarios you're playing as, from new cards you're going to have in the game, from new characters you have in the game. There's going to be new ways you can get your hands on just a ton of allies and experience, and also more misfortunes and more cards that are added to your experience, meaning the basic game of Atlantis Rising is going to have a deck of cards that represents a pool of the various islands themselves that are flooding, but then also things like calm seas where you have an actual reprieve for a moment, as well as a variety of different misfortunes that are shuffled into the deck. And Atlantis Rising Monstrosities is going to add more misfortune cards and more variants to the calm seas cards that are going to give you different ways of having things thrown at you, both for better and for worse, that mix up the experience, some of which are going to be ways to get your hands on various allies, or even have allies in your way. Some of the allies are actually going to represent as threats initially, until you're able to overcome them and convert them to your side. These allies are going to replace some of your workers, or sometimes replace, sometimes add to your workers in the game, as you have more tools at your disposal. Each of these are going to have their own asymmetric ability, and they're a good extra balance to the fact that the monstrosities represent an additional hurdle to get over, and the allies, or more specifically the potential to recruit allies, are going to give you more tools at your disposal to be able to do interesting things. Each ally is basically a worker that comes with its own unique ability that gives it something else it can do. You know, maybe it has a double opportunity to collect. Maybe it's going to be better at collecting various steel or helping your other players collect steel. They all have their own twist as far as what they do, but they represent variety of workers in the game. And then lastly, there's going to be the relics, or the magic items, which I don't know where they have. I don't know if I have them out over here, but you have magic items, one of which is going to be that mirror that's taking down Medusa in the game, but then past that there are going to be a bunch of other magic items that you have the opportunity to try to craft yourself to help you in the experience, although you're doing so with components that you also need to be able to go ahead and build out the magical the components for the end game whatnot. And so you're trying to choose to build out those magic items, but you need the opportunity to actually craft or build them. So that's another balancing act that you're trying to be mindful of, and I think one of the allies gives you that opportunity, if I recall correctly. I don't remember all the various things that go on here, but you're going to have magic items, that's just a new items that you can kind of assign to specific workers and have them go out with these tools at the disposal. And then the very last thing is something I can't comment as much on, but it's going to be the solo mode components. There's a whole new deck of solo cards that replace the way you typically engage with a solo game if you are playing this game true solo. You see, when you play Atlantis Rising solo, you can either control multiple tribes, or you can go ahead and just control it with a slight solo variant. In the original base game had one, and this kind of replaces that with these cards over here that give you a slightly different way to go through that make it a little easier and possibly a drop more variable as you go through it. And that's going to be what the expansion brings, what Monstrosity brings to your table. Which means now it's time to talk about my opinions on all those things, because I mostly have positive things to say about Monstrosities, with a few small negatives, or not necessarily negatives so much as things to be mindful of. The first is, let's talk about the more stuff. More characters is just plain good. I've played with, I think, most of the characters, if not all. I think I've actually played with or as all of the new characters, and they're all fun new additions to the game. If you like the various characters in Atlantis Rising, if you like the variety they bring to the table, the new characters bring more variety, more interesting decisions, more ways to combine a bunch of characters. So if you like the characters in Atlantis Rising in general, and you just wish that you had more variety, they're good characters. I like them. I recommend them. I think variety is one of the easier types of expansions to incorporate into a gameplay, in the sense that it's just, you know, just more variety to the experience. It's the stuff you're already used to. There's no additional rules overhead, and so I think the new characters are good. Similarly, the new artifacts as well are good. There's a drop of a critique will come down to, because I do have a general critique about some of the overall expansion elements being added, but for the most part, the artifacts are just good additional variety. I don't know which ones I've played with or as. They're shuffled in randomly, so I can't say I've played with or as all of the various artifacts in the game. Not really as, but getting them. I can't say I've experienced all the artifacts, but for the most part, the artifacts, I've experienced some of them for sure, and they're definitely just fun new things to be added to the experience, so I like the artifacts that the game is adding in general. Past that, the components, again, haven't been able to experience all the new components, but from what I have been able to experience, it's more good stuff, more variety. So I think the variety-based components are just a good thing. There are more ways to incorporate some more of the same into your game experience in a good way. That's true for the Misfortune deck as well. The additional Misfortune cards that are being shuffled in, so you have more variety to the special misfortunes that you experience. All of that is just variety with the slight cost of additional setup stuff, which we will come back to because that is one of the negatives I have about this expansion in general. But past that, more variety is good. As far as the magic items, I wish there were more, honestly. There's only like 3 or 4 magic items past the mirror for Medusa, and so I wish there were a lot more. Like, I like the concept of what they're going for, but they only have, I think there's only 4 past the special one that's scenario based. And so I just want more magic items, I guess. I like them. I think they're a fun little twist. I think they're a fun thing to be mindful of. Not everything gives you the opportunity to craft them, so I understand why you don't need that many. But I feel 4 is just like a small number. Like, give us like 10. Give us 10 magic items. I like the concept. I just wish there were more. It feels like a little limited in terms of what they gave you. As far as the allies are easily my favorite new part. The allies just give you new, very easy to incorporate worker placement things that will go onto your board. You'll be able to utilize their various abilities. There's a whole bunch of them. I think there's 10 different allies if I'm not mistaken, and they all just give you something else to be mindful of or consider with a small, very minimal amount of rules overhead. So I really enjoy the allies, and I think they're a good, solid addition that kind of gives you variety, but really new. It's a new aspect of variety. So it's not just variety, but it's new, and I appreciate having them added to the game. Some come into play with specific effects, so you have that specific ally or that specific ally, and other things in the game will give you the opportunity to recruit any ally of your choice, and so you'll always be able to filter through them and experience them in different ways. I think they're just a solid, easy addition to the game. As far as the monstrosities themselves, again, for the most part, a solid addition to the game. For the monstrosities, it gives you an additional step to be mindful of doing the actual phases of the game as the game tries to beat you back down. It's a little bit of extra overhead to remember. If you are someone who's played Atlantis Rising before, it is very easy to forget to move or deal with the monstrosities as you go through it. This is a game where I would say that I've played as the monstrosities, but I think Medusa, I believe, was the first one I played as, and I think while I did win that game, I think I also forgot to move Medusa maybe like every 4th turn. I just forgot to move her, and then realized I was like, oh, I don't think she's moved around the board. So that is something that's very easy to forget. If you're coming into it new, you have to get mentally locked in that you're not just flooding the board, you're also dealing with the monstrosities. But that's more of just adapting to the new experience. But for the most part, the monstrosities just give you additional difficulty, but difficulty with variety at the cost of rules overhead, which I think is a good time to talk about the cost. So the solo aspects, I haven't played the original Atlantis Rising true solo, and I haven't played Monstrosities true solo either, so I can't comment on the new solo components because I just haven't engaged in those. But as far as the various costs on the table, as far as the things that are more things to be mindful of, the biggest thing is going to be rules overhead and setup and maintenance overhead, especially with the monstrosities. I think everything else is very easy to incorporate from a stance of rules overhead. The monstrosities are the only things, well, the monstrosities over here, the monstrosities are the only thing that I think has a bit more rules overhead because each one provides their own slight way that they act. Now, they all act somewhat similar as far as the phases, as far as them moving, doing their bad thing, but they all have slight tweaks to how you engage with them. And so in this game, you're trying to balance all the things you already have to know about the base game, all the various characters you're fighting against, all the various abilities and allies, and then also that rules overhead of something that's variable game to game. It is not a significant amount of rules overhead, but I mean, if you're playing as this game, you're going to want to dive in, read the rules for one of the monstrosities, dive into it, play it, and then go in and read the rules for the next monstrosity, rinse and repeat. And so it may take you a bunch of games before you have it clearly under your belt as far as how they operate, as opposed to having to read the rules on them every single time you dive back in. So not really a negative so much as a mindfulness that sometimes more stuff comes at the cost of more rules overhead, and that's mostly true with monstrosities over anything else that this expansion brings to the table. And then lastly, the only other critique I really have is that setup for the game gets slightly more annoying with all the new stuff. And that's because there's a lot of ways to adjust around the rules. Some of the various characters you'll play as will have their own rules overhead. You're going to be mixing in artifacts in a way that you haven't before, in terms of more artifacts are being shuffled in, chosen into what the cards you need. The regular cards have a whole steps of which cards are being added, depending if you are playing solo, if you're not playing it solo. If you're playing a 2 or 3 player, there are a bunch of cards that are or are not added, which is slightly irritating to have that additional just setup steps to the game. It's nothing major, it's not a big deal, but it's noticeably, I would say, the setup process of getting the game up and ready when you're playing with Monstrosities, between knowing the steps of setting up the base game and knowing the steps of the expansion and of the player count and the agency of what cards you're adding. Are you adding the regular ComCs? Are you adding some of the new ones that proxy in for that? What else? What additional steps are you doing as far as the misfortune cards? The various is another type of misfortune card. There's wonders, and there's, I'm trying to remember, I think there's wonders. I can't remember the exact cards that there are, but there's a few new cards that are added to the building of the deck that's hitting you down, and that deck just becomes a little bit obnoxious to construct. Not in any terrible way, not by a long shot, but enough so that even multiple games in, I found the setup steps for Atlantis Rising Monstrosities just felt a bit more tedious and a bit more, getting it out of the way than the base game, which is pretty smooth to get up and running. So it's not a big complaint. It's not, but it was, I guess the way I'd put it is, it doesn't overly detract from the overall experience, but it has been enough across multiple games that it was noticeable for me going through those hoops. Those are the only 2 cons I have as far as the expansion goes. Which brings us to the final thoughts on the expansion. Overall, I think Atlantis Rising Monstrosities is a good expansion to a good game. I think it gives you more variety to stuff you already know. I think it gives you new stuff that give you an easy way to add additional content to the game. It comes primarily at the cost of rules overhead, as well as setup maintenance in the game, but that's a small cost to pay if you are someone who is already familiar with the game system, already likes the game system, and was looking for more for the game system. So overall, Atlantis Rising Monstrosities is a good expansion for a good game. Rating-wise, I don't think it changes my rating of the original game. For me, Atlantis Rising is a 3.5 out of 5. I like the game a lot. I also have complaints as far as some of the randomness or how swingy it can be depending on how good that early game goes. I think overall I enjoy and like Atlantis Rising, and Monstrosities is I think I'd probably play with Monstrosities every single time I play with it at this point, because it just adds more variety and more interesting things going on to an already good experience. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.